So today I am in sunny Mallorca. I'm here at New Box, and I want to explain to you a little bit about the hip joint. In previous lessons we looked at various parts of the body. One of the parts we looked at was the shoulder. Now the hip and the shoulder share a certain commonality, and that is that they are both ball and socket joints. However, they are very different in the sense that my shoulder has this huge free range of motion. It's not as stable as the hip. My hip is a very mobile joint, but because of the actual articulation of the joint and how it fits in, and also the whole muscle bulk that I have, it doesn't have the same range of motion. One of the reasons for that, as you can see, I'm standing, and therefore it's weight bearing most of the day. My shoulder doesn't have that same weight bearing capacity, therefore it has a lot more range of motion, a lot more flexibility. So in essence, a lot of range of motion at the hip, but also it needs that stability because it's most of the day weight bearing. When we jump, when we run, when we do most things, we need that hip to be producing the power and keeping the rest of our body upright and stable. The first thing we're going to do is look at just improving our hip flexibility in all of those ranges of motion, and then we're going to start to load it a little bit more. With the shoulder, we do a lot of weighted mobility, as I said, because of its innate, it doesn't have as much stability as the hip joint. However, with the hip, we're going to start with some non-weighted mobility, and then as we advance through, we're going to start adding some weight to those movements as well. We're going to start out with like a very classic old school hip movement, and this is just to get things going, get the hip loosened up, and we're really just going to start with some hip swings. We're going to start with going forward back, and you can kind of work 10 in each range, and as you can see here, I work flexion, extension. And what I really want you to do is just try and get the hip moving as much as possible. We're then going to go into this adduction, abduction. I can place the hands on the wall for stability, and same thing. I'm just going to rock side to side. And I really just want to try and have my hip feeling loose and free as I go through these. And then finally, we're going to work a focus on our external rotation and internal rotation. So the external, I'm coming in, big loop around, and then I just alter direction, have a bit more of a focus coming through on the inside. So we can do that both sides. I work my right leg, same thing, backwards, forwards, lateral. And actually, even just now, I've not trained or warmed up already today, but I can already feel that my left hip, just simply by doing that, is a bit looser than my right hip. And this is a really good start to, kind of like a good starting process for getting the body going, getting the hips going. Next, we're going to go a bit deeper into these stretches. As you can see, my left leg now is in external rotation, right hip is in internal rotation. And the internal rotation of the hip in CrossFit is so important. We're squatting so much, and with that deep flexion, we get this element of internal rotation. And so it's really important that we start to warm this up. Typically my internal rotation on the right doesn't tend to be as good as the left, and I can already feel that there, that my right hip's like struggling a little bit more to get into the position. And what I want here is to just be able to sit comfortably and have kind of both butt cheeks sitting on the floor. And my right's a little bit raised. And if I go over to my left, I can kind of sit a bit more comfortably in there as we go down. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just take my hands behind. What this actually does, as well as taking some of the weight away, it means I don't have to be in as much flexion as I go through, and it just makes the movement easier. So I just rock kind of like 10 to 20 times side to side. Then as I get more comfortable, I can take my hands off, and I can actually start to lean a bit more into the position as we go through. And then actually, if you want to take it steps further, you can start to add in some holds. We're kind of really taking now that internal rotation, and you can see that my muscles starting to work here. I can come through onto the other side. I can do the same thing as we come through. So this is like a nice little drill just to get the internal external rotation of the hips happening. Again, it's a very easy drill to do. You can hit 20 or so reps each side, and it shouldn't take too long. As you start to go more into the isometric holds, that's a little bit more taxing, so you only want to hit that 2 to 3 times. So next exercise we're going into is called the Straddle Stretch. Manu's choosing his angles wisely for this video. But actually the first thing you want to know, one is how wide I can get my legs apart, and what you'll instantly notice is that we start to hit these adductors, in essence the inside muscles of the thigh. So how wide can I get my legs apart? And then actually what you'll notice here, a lot of people tend to be quite rounded. The first thing I actually want to try and do is get a little bit of extension in my low back. So I'm sitting nice and upright, and then from that position, I'm just going to do some dynamic leaning forward. I really want to try and fight for some extension at the low back. You'll see that engages the adductors a bit more. And then I can start experimenting. I can go side to side. I can do reach, alternating reaches. I can hold this position a little bit. But I really just want to explore in this straddle position. And this comes very useful for slightly wider, deeper squats, just making sure that you're comfortable in that position. The next exercise is for our hip extension. I would argue that more so than the other movements, the hip extension kind of gets forgotten about a little bit, but it can be very useful, especially when you go into a split jerk, lunges, and anything really that requires our hip to become extended. What I'm going to do here now, I'm just going to squeeze my butt. The reason for that is because I'm working hip extension. My butt's not squeezed, I don't stay in extension, and then I'm actually just going to gently reach back and try and touch the floor. And you should feel like it can be quite an intense pull either side as we come through. And again, I'm not pushing it too hard, so I can work kind of 10 to 20 reps each side through the hip joint here. Yeah, so there's our little hip extension drill. And what you'll notice now is that we've gone through this internal and external rotation. We started to work a little bit on our adductors. We worked on our extension. And now we're going to go through what we call the 4D hip stretch, just to kind of finish our non-loaded stretching. The next thing we're going to do is go through what we call the 4D hip stretch. It's 4 directions. The first one, we're going to load up our hamstrings. And I'm not going to spend too long on this, I just want you to get an idea of the movements. But basically my hip goes back and I feel that load on the hamstring. It's position number 1. Position number 2, I go back to those adductors. Same thing, I'm just loading up through the inside. Position number 3, we come onto these external rotators and I'm pushing back. I want to feel this kind of in the side of my butt, on the outside of that hip. One thing that's important to notice here, as I'm coming back, my knee is actually going back as well. What a lot of people tend to do is flex from the low back. We want to engage that, get really deep into that hip joint there. Finally, that's 3 directions, 1 more direction. I'm going to come on here and I'm just going to work that hip extension in a slightly different way again. So there we have a selection of exercises. There are a myriad of exercises that you can do for the hip. This is just a selection, but just by doing this, spending 5 minutes or so, you'll already notice that your hips will feel quite a bit looser, and it will help kind of going into squatting, a lot of movements that we do in CrossFit. So finally for our hip, we're going to start to use a little bit of external weight now. So I've just got a 10 kilo here as we go through. And I'm going to be working 3 positions. I'm going to have my feet together, feet in what we call our sumo stance. So this is obviously a lot wider than we would typically go. And then feet in more of a regular stance. The first one I'm going to work is this feet close together. I'm going to take the dumbbell up to goblet and I'm just going to squat down. I'm just going to go slow and controlled to start with. And I just want to try to make sure that I can get all the way down, that I'm tracking. You can see that left leg wants to come out. So I'm just starting to make sure that the patterning of my squat is on point. So that's feet together. Now we take it out into our sumo. And the same thing. My torso staying upright. I'm going to try and track down into that bottom position. and back up. You might feel the hips differently. So right now I'm really feeling that right hip, which is quite common for me. So go back up. And I'm trying to stay nice and balanced. This is actually where a mirror can come in useful. You'll be able to see that discrepancy between the left and the right leg, and a mirror can really help you self-correct. And then finally, I'm going to come into my normal squat, where I'm just balanced down and back up. Yeah? So after I've done my non-weighted mobility, stretching, I'm then going to grab a little bit of weight. I'm just going to start to load it up in a controlled environment before I might begin my Olympic lifting or squat session. Thank you for watching. I really hope this video helped to either increase your hip mobility, or also if you've been suffering from any pain, to kind of help address some of those issues. If you do have any questions or comments, you can leave them below, and I will see you soon for the next program lesson.